my loves, welcome back. I've just been running up and down the house and I'm sweating like a pig. I did apply a lot of powder today because it's hot and I'm shiny anyway as a person, but I've undone all my hard work and I ain't going back downstairs to get some more powder. Welcome back to the Becoming a Reader series, the So You Want to Be a Reader series. I've got a coffee, which I don't feel much like drinking after having run up and down the stairs so much, but I'm going to drink it anyway, and I'm going to give you some more tricks and tips about how to incorporate reading into your life and become a reader. Now, if you haven't watched my first video, you don't have to go back and watch the whole thing, but it does have a bit more of a kind of introduction to this series. Just to reiterate, for me, a reader is someone that reads regularly and enjoys it. That's literally it. And so this series is aiming to help people get to that place. So the first video was really about finding the right books, how to go about that, how to just start on your journey of reading. That is such a key part of this whole thing. That's kind of step one. Finding the right books for you, because different books are going to work for different people, and if you're not reading the right books, you're not going to want to incorporate reading into your life. This video is going to be more about how to read more. So maybe you've found some books that you like, but you want to make reading more of a habit. And I'm also, as I said, going to do a note-taking series, like a whole series about taking notes, which is going to be more about analysing books, so how to get the most out of your books. But this video is really just the practicalities of reading more. So in this video, I think there's kind of two main things to take away from it, really. The first is being intentional, and the second is practice makes perfect when it comes to reading. So I'm going to start by using the gym analogy, which may strike fear into your heart, or it may not. But reading as a habit is worth approaching really intentionally, maybe like you would approach, starting a new fitness journey. I think maybe, and I've been there myself, for a lot of people, reading feels like it should come sort of naturally or easily. You should be able to pick up a book that's lying around your house and read regularly from there. But I think to really read more, to enjoy what you're reading, you do have to approach it with a little bit more intentionality, a little bit more planning. So it's kind of like going to the gym. You're going to want a plan of action to get the best results. And I guess that applies a little bit to what I said in my first video as well. As I was saying in that video, I think you do have to be actually, intentional and search carefully for books that are going to work for you. It doesn't always work to just read whatever's best selling at the moment, because books are so subjective and everyone feels differently about books. It's kind of the wonderful thing about them, because then you can share opinions, discuss them, but yeah, not everyone's going to feel the same way about books. That was kind of what I was saying in that video, and we're going to build on that today. But before we do get into that, I did want to talk a little bit more about honing your taste, which I think could have fit into my last video, but I'm going to discuss it here quickly. It's a real process actually, and something that I'm only just really feeling like I'm managing to do. So that's coming from someone that's been reading for a long time. So bear that in mind. It's a process, and like I said, practice makes perfect with all of this stuff. The more you read, the better you'll get at it. It's like flexing a muscle. The reason I want to talk a little bit about honing your taste is because, well, it's just extremely helpful with finding books that you're going to like. So say you've kind of found a few books you've liked and you've got a list of books that you really enjoyed, but I know for people that maybe haven't studied literature or haven't read like vast amounts, it's kind of difficult actually to tell what it is you liked about them. So we talked a lot about genre in the last video, and I think when it comes to book recommendations, people really look at plotline. So I'm going to use The Secret History as an example. So The Secret History is kind of like the mother book of the dark academia genre, right? So say you really, really enjoyed The Secret History and people recommend dark academia books that have been published in the last few years. But maybe what you actually really liked about the book is the writing style. That kind of, to me, that book feels just so 90s. It's got that really 90s realism, psychological realistic style. And of course, it marries beautifully with those thrillerish aspects of The Secret History and the academic setting. And it merges together in a book that's astoundingly popular even today. It's worth thinking, did you really like the writing style that kind of assured 90s realism. Because in that case, maybe you're going to like the John Irvings of the world. Maybe you'll like Jane Smiley's 1,000 Acres, which is a retelling of King Lear set on a farm. You know, it's not similar plot-wise to The Secret History, but I think style-wise it is akin to it. That is, if you people either love or hate the farming stuff, so you kind of gotta try it and see if you like it. You might like the Jeffrey Eugenides of the world. It's really actually just a kind of minor point. It's worth looking at eras, because eras have vibes. Do you know what I mean? So for me, I know I love contemporary. I tend to really appreciate the style of things from the 80s to now. I'm a little bit more funny with modernism. 60s and 70s are a bit hit and miss for me. And it's worth, if you really like Donna Tartt, to look at her kind of age mates, I suppose, in terms of writing. Authors change across time as well. So even if you liked, because I liked The Secret History when I read it, and it was a few years ago now, so I do kind of think I need to reread it. But I liked The Secret History. To be fair, her style has stayed quite similar, but I didn't like The Goldfinch so much. But a sad example is Jane Smiley. I love her older stuff. I'm less convinced by her newer stuff. As a kind of minor point, it's worth thinking about eras. I think it's maybe something that a lot of readers may be thinking about less. So that's just like one example of a million examples. But it's worth thinking beyond plot when you're looking for similar books. So you might like, and this is where Storygraph is really helpful. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about Storygraph and Goodreads and stuff. But Storygraph has fantastic and very helpful things going on it. So here's The Secret History. And you can see these tags here. So we've got fiction, literary, mystery, thriller, and then we've got kind of moods: dark, mysterious, tense, slow paced. So I tend to, and then when I go onto my stats, we go on my stats of all time. So when I go onto my stats of all time, it's going to show me the kind of moods that I like to read. Typically, I like reflective, dark, emotional books. Those are my top 3. I hit them every year. And I also tend to go for kind of medium and slow-paced books over fast-paced. You might find you prefer fast-paced books, but that Storygraph is really helpful for that kind of thing. Then it's going to give you even like a list of your genres. So I typically read literary books, classics, historical books, fantasy, contemporary, science fiction. Obviously that sums me up. So if you're not sure, if you're kind of new to reading, I suppose, and you're not sure what the pacing of a book is, it's a really good place to look, kind of find out the trends of how you're reading. You might prefer fast-paced books, you might prefer slower-paced books. I like spending more time on the little things, so I definitely like slower-paced books. We've obviously talked about genre. You might kind of the tone of the book. So as I said, Storygraph looks at the kind of moods, they call them. So is it dark, or is it kind of more uplifting or adventurous? Or let me have a look at some of the other ones they've got on here. So, or do you like funny books? Yeah, light-hearted, inspiring, hopeful, relaxing. They have all those moods on there as well. They just don't turn up so much in my stats. Also kind of the narration style. Do you like first person or third person narrators? So The Secret History has this very intimate first person narration. It's an I narrator, so the narrator is talking directly at you, and 1,000 Acres has that as well. Or do you prefer the kind of more overarching omniscient narrator who kind of knows everything? You might like both. I like both. But you know, these are all things that you can look at in the books that you have read and liked, and try and find other recommendations based on those, not just on what the book is literally about. And then you can use websites like Storygraph and Goodreads to read reviews. Now I find negative reviews just as helpful as positive reviews, and I kind of filter them out through the stars, and I go through all the different stars and read. I usually read like the best reviews, the middling reviews, and the negative reviews of books to see sort of where I would stand on a book. For example, if the negative review says something like, this book was so boring, it was so slow, it focused so much on the little things, I'm thinking, great, like that's the kind of thing I enjoy when I read. If the positive review is something like, this was such a fast-paced, rollicking adventure, and you know, I loved every second, I might be like, it might not be for me. I'll have to investigate further. So, because I think, especially, and I know I've done this myself, I've read, you know, glowing reviews of books and then gone to read them and just not seen it at all, and that's because I think I didn't know my own taste very well. So that's why honing your taste and knowing a little bit about what you do like is really, really helpful. And that's again where the kind of intentionality aspect of this all comes in, because, you know, a little bit of reflection can have a huge, amazing impact on your reading. For most of my reading life, I didn't really even think about it. You know, when I was a kid, I was hardly reflecting on, what did I really like specifically about that book? I would just go out and buy a bunch of books, and I'd prefer some to others. But it is really, really, really helpful, and it can really help you find good books. But moving on into the more kind of practical tips of how to read more, literally how to fit more reading into your life. There's kind of a scale with this reading more thing. So there's making reading a habit, reading regularly. That's kind of where we want to be at the least, and then kind of go all the way through up the scale to like a reading sprint where you're reading as much as possible in the shortest amount of time. And I did one of these last week because I had to read some books for my article that I was writing. So I think in general I would say I sit somewhere in the middle of the scale, so I'm probably pushing to read a little more than I might if I didn't have this channel, if I didn't talk about books online, if I didn't have my Patreon. You know, I'm pushing a little bit beyond the kind of norm, I would say. But you'll want to be somewhere on the scale, right? But to be too far at the top all the time, I think it's not sustainable and it's not really that healthy. Like any habit, things have to be balanced, you know, and, you know, reading voraciously just to get those numbers in, just to tick off, you know, X amount of books a year or a month or a week, it will lead to burnout. First of all, you'll just get sick of reading, I think, but also it's just really important to have some balance. You know, reading is quite a solitary, sedentary hobby, and you know, you don't want it to invade your life to the point where you're not keeping up with your relationships, you know, pursuing other hobbies and other things you like to do and getting out and walking and moving your body. I know that's probably really obvious, but reading can become quite obsessive because it's so wonderful. And especially when you do start setting goals for yourself. I guess what I'm saying is the goal here is not to squeeze reading into every nook and cranny of your life to the point where you do nothing else. That's not kind of what I'm advocating for here. Balance is good, balance is key. It may sound at some points like I am because I do an awful lot of reading, but at the same time I totally understand the desire to read as much as possible because I have it and I want to read all the good books that exist because I'm definitely not going to squeeze them all into my lifetime. So I understand. So it feels like there's a time limit sometimes and you need to read as much as possible, but balance is key. So yeah, we want to sit somewhere on that scale. Having little reading sprints and little challenges is fun from time to time, but yeah, it's not sustainable long term. And for me, there's kind of two types of reading time. There's the big chunky time where you're going to sit down and read for like at least an hour probably, and then there's the little fragments of time in between things where you can squeeze reading in, and you'll be amazed how much of a difference it makes to add that in on top of the kind of chunky reading time. So with the kind of big chunks of time, those are not sadly going to appear on their own. These are the sorts of things you want to kind of think about. So for me, if it's a book club week for me, or I'm reading for my article or something, I will spend my childcare time reading, like my work time reading, which I think is the greatest privilege of my life probably. So I'm going to talk a little bit about reading as a mum in a minute, but just so you know, that is where I'm getting a lot of my kind of reading chunks. And another chunk that I have is sometimes I will have completed what's on my to-do list for the day. And yes, I could start on tomorrow's to-do list, but you know what? I might spend the hour at the end of the day or something like 40 minutes at the end of the day doing some reading before I'm back into mum mode. So, and that's kind of like, I know people don't really have commutes anymore, but the equivalent of a commute, I suppose. That kind of those kind of chunks, middling chunks, shall we say, are really useful to build into your day and to just think about a little bit in advance. You're going to want to, and I will say actually, something which I think is quite important is having daytime reading. So don't rely on pre-bed reading as your kind of main reading time. Maybe you do spend an hour or two before bed reading, but I think it's also important to work it in other places, because for me, like as a reader, I don't do a lot of pre-bed reading. That time is really time for me to spend with Zach. Maybe we're watching a show together, chatting, talking about plans, XYZ, whatever. And also I'm tired, and the moment I often read a few pages before bed. I'm never going to get through like lots and lots of a book at that time of day. I have to do daytime reading. Taking yourself on little reading dates is very cute. I would recommend this for mums as well. You know, if you want like rest time that feels like recuperative and regenerative, it can be really nice to like say, you know, hand the baby over to your partner and head out for a couple of hours to the coffee shop and read. Gorgeous, like on a weekend or something. If you don't have a baby, you know, and you might have a little bit more time to play with. I know everybody's busy, to be honest, but you know, maybe you read when you get home from work, maybe you read in your lunch break. I will say that, for example, during my masters, this is where kind of an e-reader comes in. I would read at lunch on my e-reader, and an e-reader is great for that kind of thing because, you know, you don't have to hold the book open, you don't have to turn the pages or whatever. If you want to read while you're doing something else, you know, while you're eating your breakfast, while you're having your lunch, whatever it might be, e-reader I would recommend. And there's other reasons to recommend an e-reader, which we'll get to in a minute. Yeah, you're gonna kind of have to think of these chunks of time and dedicate that time to reading. You know, maybe it's a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, whatever it might be. It's a really, as I say, it's a really lovely thing actually when you kind of say, do you know what, I'm going to spend 2 hours here reading. It feels like self-care. Do you know what I mean? So then we come to the second type of reading time, which is the like little fragments and little bits throughout the day. It's amazing how many more pages you can cover by including these, and how many more books you can read. But I will say that you can't do all your reading just in these times. It's really hard to emotionally connect with a book, I think, when you haven't given it like an hour or so at least. You know, reading a page here and there is not going to give you like a really good experience of the book generally. So it's important to have both. For these little fragments, it's really about never, ever being without a book on you. And this is where the kind of multiple books at a time comes in. So I know some people really hate reading multiple books at a time, and to be honest, naturally I lean more that way. I like having one book as my main focus. At the moment I'm reading about 6, I think, but anyway, but it's really good to have multiple forms, even if it's not like, oh, you have a non-fiction, you have a fiction, and you have, you know, a memoir or whatever. It's really good to have books in different forms. You can add those categories in if you want as well, but I always have a physical book because I prefer reading a physical book. I always have an audiobook on the go, and I always have a book going on my e-reader, and I also have the Kindle app on my phone, so I always have access to it because it's on my phone. So I always have my audiobook playing when I'm getting ready in the morning and when I'm getting ready for bed. These are times of the day that I absolutely hate. The getting ready in general, I just find it so tedious. I always have my audiobook going then. Again, maybe sometimes you like to listen to music, you like to listen to your podcast. You don't have to listen to an audiobook every single day, but I like doing it, and it's a really great way for me to get some reading done, especially when we've had a busy day or something and I haven't had time to sit down with my physical book, which happens quite a lot. It's really nice for me to be able to access reading in a different way pretty much every day. The e-reader and the kind of book on your phone thing just speaks for itself. I think, you know, anytime you're in a waiting room and you've forgotten to put your book in your bag, you've got a book. You're on the tube and you've forgotten to put your book in your bag, you've got a book. When I have to be in a dark room with a toddler when she's sleeping, back in the day it could be when she was awake, but these days when she's sleeping and I have to be in the room with her in the dark, I've got a book. You've always got one to hand. And this is where it requires a little bit of willpower, because it's really easy obviously to just scroll instead. And it does, as I say, it is a bit like flexing a muscle. You know, the more you reach for the book instead of the phone, or the more you open that book app instead of Instagram, the easier it gets. But at the beginning, it is going to feel like a little bit difficult and quite uncomfortable almost. And I think that's where the kind of setting goals stuff can come in, which we'll get to in a bit. It kind of gives you the motivation. But yeah, I consider my physical book my kind of main book. That's where when I do my chunky reading, that's what I'm going to do. And then the other ones are more kind of convenience books, I suppose. It does mean that my e-reader book does tend to be so fragmented, and sometimes I will, like I say, spend like a chunky period reading it, just catching up with it and getting more into it. But yeah, swapping scrolling time for the book. Sometimes reading a book on your phone can actually kind of satisfy the scrolling craving, but obviously in a more productive way. And yeah, again, it's just a little bit of habit, and thinking in advance about it is really, really helpful. So you know, I told myself a few months ago, when Zach takes the baby for a bath, I'll do all the cleanup, do the washing up and stuff, and if I've got 10-15 minutes after I finish that, then I'll sit down and read a book. I will not scroll. You know, it's just like telling yourself this stuff in advance is quite helpful, because I feel like, and anticipating when you're most likely to scroll, and you know, swapping it out in your mind for reading time, I think it's quite a powerful thing actually. I had a lot of questions. I am going to do a separate Q&A, by the way, of the questions that I got through Instagram a few weeks ago now. I got a lot of questions though about being distracted by your phone in general as well. Other really important things to do is to get it out of your sight. So if you're not reading on your phone, you are reading a physical book, it has to be out of your sight. So I have a special focus on, so as a mum, I am constantly worried I'm going to miss an emergency call or something when I'm reading, and so I do feel a bit nervous about putting my phone out of my sight. So I have a special kind of focus setting that I think is all calls can come through, and you know, I can get texts from emergency contacts and stuff, but all my other notifications are silenced. And then I'll put it on loud and then I'll put it out of my sight. Sometimes even putting it in another room is helpful. So yeah, it's a sight thing, because your like mind gets distracted by it. You have to not be able to see it. That's really, really important. And again, the more you do it, the easier it will become, the better you'll be at it. Also, I know our focuses are all shot because of apps like TikTok. So another thing to do is just to set small goals and like build your focus up. It's all about practice. So say, you know, set a timer on your phone for 20 minutes and say, I'm going to read for 20 minutes. I'm not going to touch my phone. I'm not going to do anything. Maybe you spend the whole time on one page just trying to read it. But trust me, with time, the more you do it, the easier it will become again. I have really found my concentration, my focus has improved a lot since I have upped the reading in my day versus the scrolling time. And now I feel the urge a lot less. I feel the urge to pick up the book more than I feel the urge to go on the apps, basically. Reading as a mum, that was another kind of big question and topic I got. So the e-reader is your friend. Particularly in the early days, the e-reader is your friend because it's a one-handed thing. So you can read during contact naps, you can read when you're feeding, you can read. I did all the night feeds reading. It's kind of better for you than watching a show. I mean, watch a show if you want to, obviously, but it does disturb your sleep a little bit less. I could never be asked to get the headphones out and all that kind of stuff as well on top of everything else. So I ended up just reading through a lot of the night feeds, which was wonderful. I think I read the majority of Perdido Street Station by China Miéville in a dark room in the middle of the night, and definitely Horse Heaven by Jane Smiley as well. So at least for the kind of first year of Inez's life, I was just like, I love physical books, but I'm not going to be able to read many of them, and I read a lot on my e-reader. Also, this is more of a general mum thing rather than specific to reading, but I think it has benefits for reading as well. The baby's nap time and rest time is your rest time. So do chores when the baby is awake. For countless reasons, I think, really. First of all, they're interested in everything, and what may seem deathly boring to us can be quite interesting to a child. Also, it helps them see how a house is run. You can get them involved from a really early age, as soon as they can kind of pick stuff up. Yes, it all takes a lot longer, and sometimes that's annoying. It has lots of benefits. So yeah, they feel like they're contributing to the household. It's a way of filling wake time, especially when you have a really small baby and you just have no idea what to do with them or how to entertain them. Doing some chores is great. It's an activity, do you know what I mean? So many benefits to like doing these boring things when the baby is awake. And if the baby is awake and not content to sit and watch you or help you, then the chores don't get done. You know, you don't have to do everything, but their rest time, the contact nap time, or if they're in the cot, whatever it is, that is time for you to do something you cannot do when they're awake, which might be reading peacefully or watching a show peacefully or scrolling quietly on your phone. Whatever it is, that is your time to rest. You don't have to sleep necessarily, but it's your rest time. That might be your reading time, and you don't need to feel guilty about that. That's your time to kind of rest and recuperate as well. But as I say, you know, I have a lot of help. I have a really supportive partner, and I do read in my childcare hours. That's how I get through quite so many books. If you're a mum and you're like, how does she read so much? That is why. And I know, you know, it's not the same for everybody. So final kind of big part of this video, an important part of this video, is setting goals. So as I said, with the kind of going to the gym analogy, being intentional about your reading can be really, really, really helpful. So already we've talked a little bit about kind of scheduling reading into your life, but the goals aspect can really help motivate you actually go through with it. So first of all, get really comfortable with your reading speed. Your reading speed will probably get quicker with practice. So the more you read, the quicker you might read. Might not be the case, but generally it's true. As I say, it's like flexing a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it will be. But be realistic to begin with. You know, if 10 books a year sounds really achievable, then absolutely put that in. And if you read more, fantastic, but at least you're working to something realistic. So yeah, this is where Storygraph and Goodreads come in again. I think Storygraph is a better service. But yeah, you can track your reading on there, and it just gives you that kind of to-do list-esque sense of achievement when you can log a book that you've read. They also both have kind of goal-setting things like yearly goals, and it's just really satisfying, basically. But there are so many different goals you can set yourself. You might just want to read for a set amount of time every day, so maybe you just want to do half an hour's reading every day and then build on that. Maybe you want to read a set number of pages every day. I tend to find books-based goals work best for me, so looking to read, you know, 50 books a year, which is what I have my settings at the moment, which I think is realistic for me. I never know quite how busy I'm going to be, but I've already hit that goal for the year, amazingly. I don't know how it happened. Maybe you want to make little TBRs. They totally work for some people, but other people they don't work at all. They didn't work for me for a couple of years there when I'd first had Inez. Now I'm back into them. I love them. So, you know, saying I want to read these 3 books this month and putting them on your bedside table and, you know, working your way through them. There's so many different goals you can have, but setting a goal is really helpful. Say for the more kind of reading sprint aspect of this, so literally you're just going to want to find big chunks of time basically, and then you're going to want to read in every moment that you possibly can where you're not focused on something else. So you've got to get your audiobooks out, you've got to get your e-readers out, you know, basically every second needs to be dedicated to reading, at as many seconds as possible in the day. But something it's really helpful to know if you are trying to do a reading sprint is how many pages you read an hour. So I read about 30 to 50, maybe a little bit more if I'm not writing copious notes, an hour. So that's really helpful to me. So when I look at a 250 page book, I'm looking at something that's probably going to take me about 5 to 8 hours to read, and you've got to find those 5 to 8 hours. So obviously that's doable in a day if you've got a large enough chunk of time, or over a couple of days, whatever it is. It's really helpful to know your reading speed. Generally, I tend to work towards page numbers than I do chapters, because it's universally applicable across all books. Some books don't have chapters. So I typically read in kind of 50-page chunks, and when you're kind of moving towards that 50-page goal, you'll be amazed at how many kind of the hundreds of pages begin to fly by. So yes, I think that is everything that I wanted to say in this video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found something helpful in here. But yes, thank you guys so much for watching today, and I will see you very soon. Bye!